I'm not an engineer. I'm not a software coder. I'm not a game developer. I have a bunch of these guys here that are amazing. I am not. But I'm going to tell you a very human story. It's a story that has many ups and downs, and ultimately has led me to where we are today, which is developing something that I think is incredibly important for not just this country, but allied nations around the world in terms of the first use case, but also the broader application for Metaverse and augmented reality. So what is Red 6? Red 6 has created the world's first Metaverse up in the sky, which allows real pilots, real fighter pilots, to go up in real airplanes and train in a digital landscape. So we're blending the best of simulation with the best of being outdoors and doing the job for real. The enabling technology that allowed us to make this breakthrough, which is a key constituent of the metaverse, obviously, is the ability to use augmented reality for the first time outdoors and in the most dynamic of environments of all. I'm talking upside down at 300 miles an hour, barrel rolling around each other under 9 Gs. So just so I can make this relatable to, can I just have a show of hands? Who has seen Top Gun, the movie? Okay, everyone. Who's seen Top Gun 2? Okay, who prefers Top Gun 2 over 1? Yeah, suspect. Okay, fine. Well, let's get into it. So who am I? This is where I was born. I grew up in the northeast of England in a coal mining town, synonymous with shipbuilding and coal mining. I grew up in the 1980s under Thatcherism, where the entire town was decimated. And still to this day, we've seen systematic over decades, year-on-year decline of this town. A pretty unlikely place to come from to be standing here on a stage chatting to you guys today. But that's where I grew up. There wasn't much to do in that town at all, but we did have one movie theater. And Seb had asked me when I started talking about this, he's like, what were the movies that really influenced your life and led you on this journey? And there were 3 movies that I saw as a kid. My dad would take me to the movie theater once every couple of months. The first one was Superman with the late, great Christopher Reeve. And Superman was the genesis of 2 things for me. It was the genesis of my love affair with flying and aviation. It was also the genesis of a love affair and an infatuation for New York City. And I was determined as a kid to manifest both of those things. I started by leaving the movie theater as having seen Superman, and my parents would tell me I would stand in the garden for hours like this, concentrating super hard, trying to take off, fundamentally not understanding the concept of gravity. If there was a platform like this, I'd run, I'd dive off it. Every single day they were catching me, I was covered in bruises and bumps. But Superman really inspired me to fly. Then I saw Star Wars. And when I saw Star Wars, I thought, my goodness, lightsabers are really, really cool, right? It's undeniable. We all love lightsabers. But for me, it was X-Wing fighters. X-Wing fighters were my jam. And I was determined to be an X-Wing pilot when I grew up, so much so that we would sit in the garden and I would literally play in the mud, building an X-Wing cockpit around me, and I'd use stones for switches and sticks for control columns, and I was Luke Skywalker flying this X-Wing around in the garden. And so all of this sort of infatuation with like being Superman, being an X-Wing pilot, it was building and building and building. Clearly not realistic. And then at the age of about 12 or 13, I was on vacation with my parents, and there was a little beach hut bar. It's one of the Mediterranean islands, I think. And there was a beach hut bar. And in those days in Europe, we would get movie films coming across into Europe. But if there's any Brits in the audience, they'll nod at this. We always got them about 1 year or 2 years behind the United States. And inevitably, there were black and white pirated VHS copies that someone had bootlegged and was playing illegally in random places. And this one day, I was in this beach hut with my sister Lucy, and I saw this movie playing in black and white, and it was Top Gun. And when I saw Top Gun, I was like, oh my goodness. This is actually a job, and it's a job that I think I can chase after and go do it. So I went bounding back into school. And in school, I went to the worst school in probably the worst town, and I know there's other Brits in here nodding because they know where I came from. The worst school in the worst town in the country. And I walked in, and we were doing a class, and the class was basically, what do you want to be when you grow up? And aspirations for kids back in those days were pretty low where I came from. So a lot of the kids would be, working to go in the coal mines, whatever it may be, noble work, important work. But our aspirations were particularly limited. So we'd fold these pieces of paper up and we'd write on what we wanted to be when you grow up. And I dared to write, I want to be a fighter pilot. And so the teacher was reading them out, and he got to mine. And he said, Mr. Robinson, come up here, stand up here. So I thought, fantastic, I'm going right to the top of the class. So I walked up to the front of the class, and he looked down at me, and he said, class, Mr. Robinson thinks he's better than the rest of you. He goes, He goes, Mr. Robinson wants to be a fighter pilot. And he looked at me, and I was this high, and he goes, go sit down and write something sensible. True story. So I was like, and I was teaching in those days, right? So I went back down. I sat down. I was humiliated. I was a pretty sensitive kid. And he was like, come on, hurry up. He was getting to the end of the list. He had me write that. So I wrote it again. I went up, and I gave him the piece of paper, and he looked at me, and he smiled, and he kicked me out of the class, and he said, I want you to do 10 laps of the playground in the pouring down rain. And it was like floor-to-ceiling glass. And so out I went, and I started running laps of the playground in the pouring down rain with all the kids laughing at me, because that second piece of paper said I want to be a fighter pilot as well. And that was the best thing that could have happened to me as a kid, because that ignited a spark in me, which became a fire, which became a fury. I was like, I am determined to show you what I can do. And so then I had to figure out, how do I get myself from this school to the Air Force Academy in the UK and on the path to at least have the opportunity to go train and be selected as a fighter pilot? So I did what anyone with a little ounce of common sense would do. I became a milkman. And this is a true story. I became a milkman because I would get up at 4 o'clock every morning as a 15, 16-year-old, and I'd carry crates of milk miles on end, really physical manual work. But every week, I would be paid 40 pounds, which with the exchange rate right now is about $40. So every 2 weeks, it meant I had 80 pounds. That's fighter pilot math. And it meant that I could afford a flying lesson. So I started to teach myself to fly by being a milkman at the age of 14 years old. And conversely, I ran into an individual that would shape my life in ways that I would carry with me forever. Sadly, he's not around anymore, but his name was Peter Gray. And Peter Gray was a flying instructor. And for all of us, I'm sure we've had, as both children and as mentors and adults, opportunities to either be influenced or influence the trajectory of someone's life. And Peter Gray was this individual for me. I would, proverbially, we were getting the crap kicked out of us every day back then. And he put his arm around me, and he said, hey, son, he goes, I think you've got some talent as a pilot. He was wrong, but he said, at least I think you've got some talent, and you should consider an Air Force scholarship scheme. And so that sort of gave me a trajectory and a vector to work my way towards the Air Force Academy in the UK, which ultimately I got selected into, and I managed to get into a pilot training slot. And so I go through the pilot training system, and I was fundamentally like an underconfident kid. I'm like the classic imposter syndrome, right? All the way to today. I'm standing on stage talking to you guys about the Metaverse. I guarantee you know 10 times more about the Metaverse than I do. And it's permeated my life since I was a kid. Was I ever good enough to do this? I was surrounded by Oxford and Cambridge graduates from the best backgrounds in the UK, and if you're from the UK, you kind of understand what that means. I was a fish out of water, and yet I entered the flying training system, and it's really difficult. And over the course of 4 to 5 years in the UK, I started to see these individuals fall away. And after about 5 years or so of training, I popped out of the training pipeline, and I was a fighter pilot flying this airplane, the Tornado. And for the sticklers in the audience or who are watching, that is not actually the version of the Tornado I flew. There's a subtle difference, but the image is cool, so it ended up in here. But that's basically the airplane that I flew for the UK as a fighter pilot. Now, I popped out, thank you. One person clapping. It's depressing. I'll take it. But I popped out in August of 2001 as a combat-ready fighter pilot. So depending on your point of view, my timing was either horrendous or exquisite, because we all know what happened in September of 2001. So the cliff notes of that are very quickly, I was out in the Middle East. And for the first 3 years of my career, I was flying operations in the Middle East as the backdrop to my first tour on the Tornado. So I got really, really experienced very, very quickly. It was a baptism of fire for me. Now, it turns out God didn't give me too many skills, but I was actually reasonable with an airplane. And so after about 3 years on this airplane, unusually early, my squadron commander came to see me, and he said, hey, this is kind of a test case, because this is unusually early in your career. Normally this happens after at least 6 years of frontline flying, but would you be interested in going to fighter weapons school? And fighter weapons school, as you've all seen in the movie, is Top Gun, basically. So I went, excuse me, what? He said, would you like to go to Top Gun? And he said, look, it's going to be a massive risk. You're not quite experienced enough, but we think you're reasonable with the airplane, and we kind of like to look at this. If you pull this off, it's going to make you walk through a gate, which is going to transform your life. And if you don't pull it off, you're inexperienced anyway. So what do you think? I said, I'll take the chance for sure all day long. So all of a sudden now, I'm at fighter weapons school, which is the hardest thing to this day I've ever done in my life. It is not about playing volleyball. It's not about playing football on the beach. It's about flying. You do some really cool flying, and they teach you to a super high level. It's like graduate school, but it's fundamentally about leadership. Because at the end of that, what you don't convey in the movies is actually you're standing on a stage like this in front of hundreds of people, leading multiple airplanes, billions of dollars of assets into highly complex environments, going up, executing missions, blended with simulation, real world, landing. And then imagine there's like 200 fighter pilots with egos the size of planets in the audience. Then you got to stand on stage and debrief that and tell them why they're wrong and screwing it up. And it starts with 3 core tenets. The mantra of the weapons school is be humble, be approachable, and be credible in that order. But underpinning all of that is a humility to learn and embrace and strive, and understanding that mistakes are an inevitable part of the human journey. And that is a fundamental principle which we try to embody fundamentally at Red 6 as part of our corporate culture. So anyway, I managed to claw my way through this course. I got through by the skin of my teeth. And some of the benefits or good deals you can get from being a weapons school graduate, quote unquote, is sometimes you're eligible for exchanges. And exchange programs to other countries are the kind of, the golden ticket. It's what we all want to do. And I'd obviously seen Top Gun as a kid. I was obsessed with naval aviation. So I applied to be an F-18 Navy pilot with the US Navy over here. And it came down to the shortlist. There was 3 of us shortlisted for the exchange, and we'd been night flying in the UK, so the whole squadron was in. In the UK, we used to go to the bar and debrief in the bar afterwards with a cocktail. And I was in the bar, the whole squadron were there, the boss had called everyone in. It was kind of like this, and he said, look, guys, we've got an announcement to make. And I thought, this is it. I'm going to be going to the Navy to fly F-18s. And he said, Dan has applied for the F-18 exchange. He's worked incredibly hard. He's been through weapons school. It's really difficult. Blah, blah, blah. He works 15-hour days. But the good deals are you can go on exchange. And here we are to make this announcement. So I thought, that's it. I'm going to be Tom Cruise. I'm going to the US Navy. I'm going to play volleyball. It's going to be awesome. And he said, on this occasion, he's been unsuccessful. And I just froze. I was devastated. I knew the shortlist. I thought I was a shoo-in for that exchange. He said, I'm telling you this story because I don't want to let it deter you. But it was about the biggest blow to my confidence, my ego, like everything. I was willing this into existence. And he let me sit with that for a few minutes. And having sat with it for a few minutes, he said, oh, guys, by the way, there's one more thing. He goes, there's a reason Dan hasn't been selected to go to the Navy to fly F-18s. And the reason he hasn't been selected to fly F-18s for the Navy is he's just been selected as the first ever non-American to fly F-22 Raptors, the stealth fighter for the US Air Force. That's much better than one. Next applause, keep that up. That's good. That's good. That's good. Thank you. So I'm drinking a Guinness. I remember it well, and I dropped my Guinness, which is tantamount to treason in the UK, and the whole bar jumped on me and beat me to the ground. And I was on the ground, I remember, and I'm this kid from the northeast of England, and I come to and I open my eyes, and the boss has stood over me. He reaches down with his hand and he pulls me up, and I say to him, "Sir, is this true?" And he said, "Yes, son." He goes, "Very well deserved." And he said something to me that ultimately connects to today, me talking to you guys today. He said, this exchange and experience will change your life in ways that you will carry with you forever, that you can't possibly understand yet. And boy, was he correct. And so 4 weeks later, I've left the UK now, and I'm training on the panhandle of Florida at Panama City, flying stealth fighters at 60,000 feet, where you can see the curvature of the earth. Remember that scene in Top Gun 2 where he's up there right at the beginning, it's black above, and you see this, it's like that. And you're on the end of a broomstick, and you're flying a $200 million stealth fighter, and I came from where I came from. So that to me was like a win and a privilege and a huge kind of blessing in my life. This airplane is a lecture in itself, and it's immensely, it was super classified back then. It's still very classified now. Back then, it was like just this mystical airplane. Whenever you checked into the airspace, it's invisible. No one can see you. You just go up there and you dominate airplanes. And so I had extraordinary access to this airplane and the capabilities of it, and I ended up being an instructor on it and teaching the first cadre of F-22 pilots to come through. And still to this day, I believe it is a true statement that there are less Raptor pilots in the world than there are people who've been to space. The airplane is very, very rare. So it's an immensely capable airplane. And it gave me access and insight into all of those capabilities, but also some of the limitations associated with not just this platform, but the broader combat air force. And I'm highlighting this now because it ultimately is the journey to Red 6, and that is lack of training. You see, for us, like in the movies, every time we go up to fly and train, we need someone to fly and train against. And that's a multi-billion-dollar-a-year problem that we're failing at. We're failing at it for a number of reasons. We don't have enough pilots. We're about 2,000 pilots short on the front line just in the US Air Force. We don't have enough airplanes. We've dwindled from 134 squadrons down to 55. And it's very expensive to do it. But even if we had the pilots and the airplanes and the dollars, it's becoming increasingly difficult to simulate modern adversaries. And so even if we got that training, it's not particularly relevant for us. And I wanted to do something about this. It turns out I'd have to wait a while. So one of the things that happened to me on the F-22 Raptor is I fell in love with the United States. I deeply fell in love with the United States and what I felt it was to be an American. And the guys and the girls that I flew with and operated with every day, some of the smartest, most capable human beings, handpicked to fly this airplane, but the most humble citizens, most humble people that truly embodied a love and devotion for this country that became infectious for me. And I really mean that as a Brit. So I called the Brits up and I said, I've got bad news. I'm not coming back. and I was supposed to be the stealth guy, right, in the UK. So that did not go down too well with the Royal Air Force at all back in the day. But I knew it was something I had to do. I knew I had to stay in the United States. I didn't quite know what it was I wanted to do. But as this journey evolves, you'll see I generally follow my gut, and it kind of leads me in really curious directions. But ultimately, I feel like I'm on the right track. So I made the decision to step down and stay in the United States. Now, you remember when I said I was a kid, I was obsessed with being Superman and New York City. I didn't want my Superman battling space aliens and things like that. I wanted my Superman saving little old ladies that were falling off skyscrapers and pulling cats out of trees and stuff like that. And I always imagined myself genuinely flying through New York City. And I've got a plan for this later in the future that I still want to do. But I wanted to get myself to New York City. And I'm like, okay, what's the major industry in New York? It's finance. I don't know anything about finance. All right, I better go to business school. So I went to business school, and I didn't really want to work in finance. I just figured it would be the right thing to do and go to New York. So I went to business school, lucky enough to travel the world for 18 months or so, having a fabulous education. So I had this kind of like background in leadership and management, which was smashed into us from the military at every level, formal academic education and MBA, and then I managed to get a job in finance in New York City. And I sat in an office with this view every day, and I sat in an apartment with this view every day. And I was absolutely miserable. I was miserable. I felt my soul leaving my body. Why was that? Because I didn't have purpose. I wasn't passionate about what I was doing. And it turned out to me that actually just chasing money was really fruitless. It was really empty. And I felt completely lost. And I knew I had to do something else with my life. And I could never have imagined the turns that I'd have to go through to get to that. And so I was sitting here, it was about November, 11 years ago, about November the 15th, about 11 years ago. And then I get a call from home, this town I'd left that would change my life forever. And you'll recall the town I talked about. And so my dad had started a company when I was a kid that had grown to be a pretty big employer in the town. It was in construction and real estate, and it grew to be a substantial employer. But this is in the middle of the wake of the financial crisis. So this is 2011. And I get a call from my dad, and he said, "Hey, son," he goes, "I'm losing everything. The business is going bankrupt." He said, "Can you come back and help me?" And I was heavily into something called Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and I had a broken shoulder at the time. And I said, "Pop, are you okay?" He said, "I'm lost." I said, "Okay." I said, "Let me go to hospital tomorrow. I'll get the stitches out of my shoulder. I'll be on the first flight back with you, and I'll be back with you on Wednesday." And this is where the story gets difficult to tell. So this was the Monday night. The Monday night. So I went to bed that night thinking, my dad's really struggling. I woke up the next morning to the news that my father had committed suicide that night. And my life was forever changed. Like this guy had driven me from being a kid to where I got to, and he was gone. And Steve Jobs in his Stanford commencement speech, bear with me because this is sometimes difficult to tell. It's random how it hits me. But Steve Jobs in his Stanford commencement speech, he talks about connecting the dots in your life and how it's very difficult to connect the dots looking forward. I'm paraphrasing. But he says you have to believe in a passion, a purpose, and follow that with every ounce of your being. And at some point, you'll arrive at a junction in your life where you have a combination of the right experience, the right education, the right network to be called, or you'll see an opportunity and you'll be there to do what was being called of you. And this happened to me this day 11 years ago. So I jumped on a flight, I went back to the UK, and now I'm back in that village that I grew up in. And I walk into the proverbial hell. I've got my mom, 3 sisters in this arm, and I have a business with 200 employees in the middle of the worst financial crisis that's bankrupt. And they're all looking at me, and they're all big, burly builders, right? And they're looking at me like, what are we going to do? And the police were there, and the bank was around, and you can imagine the pressure I was under. And I felt like I had the right experience, the right education, the right mindset, the right connections to do what was being called of me. And I knew my life had changed at that point in time. The question was, did I have the character to do it? Because I was about to embark upon a journey that would take 6 years, and that was hellish. It was a hellish journey. But the cliff notes of it were that I got the team to back me. And I got the team to back me through very specific culture. And the culture was, we are collectively a family organization. When I went to combat, when I would operate on a fighter squadron, we'd go into really difficult positions, but I'd look to the right and look to the left, and I know that human being sitting there had my back every single day. And so here's what we're going to do. I'm going to ask us all to collectively sacrifice to get us through this. But apprentices, you're going to sacrifice the least. Directors, you'll sacrifice a bit more. Managers a bit more. Directors more than them, and I'll sacrifice the most. And the cliff notes of the journey were, I compelled a company to follow me through a very, very difficult turnaround of a business. But it was a turnaround that ultimately we pulled off successfully, and I got out of there in 2018. Now, I needed to get back to my life, because kind of going from New York City being single as a fighter pilot to living at home with my mom for 5 years really cramped my love life. And it was, I need to do something. So I put my mom on eHarmony, right? She met someone. It turns out online dating is easy for her. She got married like pretty quick. So, and then I was like, okay, you're happy? I'm going to go back to the States, and I need to redefine who I am and what I'm going to do. And now we arrive at the junction where we get to Red 6, right? So going through that process, I couldn't allow myself to grieve. I couldn't do it in front of my mom. I couldn't do it in front of my siblings, and I certainly couldn't do it in front of the people I had to lead. So I started the grieving process 5 years later. I bought a surfboard, and I went into the ocean every day in Santa Monica. I moved to California with 2 bags and no plan. And I started to ask myself, like, the fundamental questions in life. If I knew when the end of my life was coming, how would I live as truthfully as possible? And I gave myself 2 rules. I'd only work on things that I was really passionate about and that I thought were incredibly important for humankind and mankind. And secondly, I would only work with people I absolutely love and whose values are aligned with those of my own. And these 2 promises I am meticulous in sticking to. And so I started to think, what do I absolutely love? And it occurred to me I'd been flying airplanes since I was 14. And because of the detour I'd been in, I'd been taken through a journey in life where I hadn't flown airplanes in a while. So I went to a flying school, and I walked in, and I said to this guy who's 21 years old, hey, I'd like to learn to fly. And this guy takes me up in an airplane, and he goes, here's straight and level, here's a turn, et cetera, et cetera. And he says, oh, you're pretty good at this. I'm like, thank you. He said, we land. And he walks in, he goes, you should really think about considering a career in aviation. And I said, well, thank you, I appreciate that. And every day, as I walked through the hangar, I'd see this airplane in the corner of the hangar. And you saw an airplane flying around at the beginning of this journey here, right? I'd see this airplane. This airplane is a Berkut Experimental. It's a beautiful airplane. And I saw the guy in the hangar that had designed and created this airplane back in the early 90s. And in the early 90s, he developed around 60, 70 kits of this. And he was kind of like a crazy engineering guy. But he was a real character. And I became a mechanic, and I just worked on this airplane day by day. And one day, he walked into the hangar with a look of astonishment on his face. And he said, Dan, you're an F-22 pilot? And I said, yes, sir. He said, why haven't you told me about this? I said, it was a while ago. I've lived a lot of life since then. He goes, well, would you like to fly my airplane? I said, I'd love to fly your airplane. So I strapped this onto myself, and I took it airborne. And it was like flying a fighter airplane again. I fell in love with aviation all over again. And so I approached Dave one day and said to Dave, hey, Dave, I'm thinking about building an airplane. It was a passion, right? I'm following my passion. I'm sticking to my rules. I don't know why, but I'm thinking of building an airplane. Would you help me? He said, absolutely not. I said, no. I said, why? He said, Dan, he goes, you remind me of two people. He said, you were born you were born the year I lost my younger brother. He said, and the year you joined the Air Force, give or take, a good friend of mine, a guy named Rick, was the demo pilot on this airplane. He goes, and he was killed in an accident in Santa Paula. And he goes, and you remind me a lot of him. You've got the same psychotic look in your eyes. And he goes, I'm not putting you anywhere near this airplane. I'm not building another one. So I said, okay, and I backed off a little bit. And over 2 months, I just persisted. And one day, I walked into the hangar, and his airplane was parked outside. And there was parked outside. He said, jump in the back. Where are we going, Dave? Down to the desert. So we flew down to Temecula, and sitting in the desert in Temecula was a gentleman called Sam Puma. And Sam was a fighter pilot of the bygone era. Cowboy hat, bow-legged, cigar, song for every occasion. Awesome guy. We had lunch with Sam, and after lunch, he said to Dave, well, should we show him? And I said, show me what? They took me into the desert, and in a barn under a tarpaulin was this one remaining Berkut kit. And Dave looked at me, and he said, this was Rick's airplane. He said, it is the guy that was killed. He goes, it has been sitting in the desert for 21 years waiting for you. He said, this is the last airplane I'm ever going to build. So we committed to building the greatest example of the airplane I could ever think of building, and that was it. And if you want to build an aerospace company and a tech company, this is how you start, right? This is 15-hour days, 18 months of manual ball-aching labor. It is absolutely brutal building it. They say building an airplane will cost you 2.25 girlfriends, boyfriends, relationships per every airplane you buy, and those stats are about accurate. It is a full-time project. As I was building the airplane now, we're getting to the core of Red 6 at last, I hear you say, I started thinking about the problems associated with training that I'd identified on the F-22. And I'm building an airplane, I'm following a passion, God is telling me to build this airplane, and into my life walks this gentleman. And this gentleman's name is Glenn Snyder. And Glenn Snyder is a visual effects guy from SCAD, became the go-to guy in LA for VR, AR experiences. Really cool stuff he did that was innovative. And in 2015, he and his partner were asked if he could drive a race car in virtual reality. And Glenn said, sure. And then they gave him a bunch of money. And over 6 months, I think it was 6 months, it was pretty quick, he basically took 2 race cars, put them on 2 separate racetracks at the same time, put a race car driver into each of them, created a virtual reality world, connected the cars together, and even though they're in different locations, the drivers could see each other, and they raced real race cars blind to the outside world. And this is from 2015. This is completely real. And when I saw that, go back to the Steve Jobs connecting the dots, follow a passion, the dots started to connect for me again. And I looked at this airplane, that thing I was pushing out, by the way, was an airplane. I looked at this airplane that I was building, and I looked at this stuff. I said, Glenn, hold, please. I called the Air Force up. I'm like, hey, do you remember me? I said, well, what are you doing with training? Has it gotten any better? They're like, nope, it's terrible. I'm like, okay, how are you going to solve it? They said, well, we got this thing, live, virtual, and constructive. And we get into simulation now. So what is live, virtual, constructive? Live is blend of real pilots and real airplanes. Virtual is putting pilots, real human beings, in simulators on the ground, but we're going to connect them up into the airspace such that the airplane sensors think they are there. That sounds cool. Constructive, what's that? Well, Dan, it's basically like virtual, but it's AI-driven algorithms. So what we do is we connect all of this stuff together, and now we create a sort of virtual world up in the sky. I'm like, how does that work in visual range? Well, it doesn't work in visual range. I'm like, well, how's that a solution? Yeah, it's not really a solution. I'm like, okay, hold please. So allow me to explain why that is important, because it's really critical to what we've done at Red 6. So the role of a fighter pilot is twofold, right? In Top Gun, you see all the visual maneuvering and stuff. It's a very real part of the job, but the fights take place a long, long way away from each other. So Myself and the gentleman at the back on the camera, we're 100 miles away. He's a bad guy, I'm a good guy. We start out. All of my work is looking down in the cockpit at a radar scope, attack displays, defense displays. We're shooting at each other, we're trading shots. And he's a kick-ass fighter pilot, and I'm doing a decent job, and neither, that's right, you are. And neither of us are dying, so we're still alive. And then but we're like three-dimensional chess players, right? And then you get to that 10 nautical mile range in, and the role of a fighter pilot changes dramatically from three-dimensional chess player to you're putting a gum shield in, you're going for the proverbial fist fight. And then it gets extremely violent. And then it's all the visual maneuvering you see in Top Gun, high Gs. And the problem with live virtual constructive is when you trip that line inside of 10 nautical miles and you went from looking at the sensors that the airplane think are there, and you look out, there's nothing there. So that's negative training. So I'm like, hold please. So I went back to Glenn and I said, Glenn, I've got two questions for you. Firstly, do you think we could do this in airplanes? He goes, well, we'd need an airplane. I'm like, aha, I'm building an airplane. I was about to put the first wire into it. He goes, we'd need someone stupid enough to test this up in the air. I'm like, aha. 2 for 2. I'm like, all right, third question, Glenn. No one is going to allow me to fly around in virtual reality up in the sky. So I'm like, can we do this in augmented reality? I didn't even know what I was asking or the implications of that question at the time. And Glenn kind of rolled his eyes and went, no. And I said, why, Glenn? He said, because augmented reality doesn't work outdoors or in dynamic environments. And if you ponder that, and we break away and we think about like AR, Metaverse and stuff in the future, I think AR and the Metaverse is $1 trillion market opportunity. I think, but for the consumer, it's 10 years away, right? I think we're kidding ourselves to pretend otherwise. I think for that consumer vision to be realized, two things happen. It has to be ubiquitous in nature, right? Which means it has to be mobile, it has to work outdoors on the move. So the right route to that, in my view, is through enterprise, and the most compelling enterprise use case of all, as far as I can see, initially is in the DoD. Why is that? Because we actually have real problems that we can solve. And for augmented reality, the single biggest thing we've got going against that industry, and I draw a very distinction between VR and AR. I'm much more interested in AR. I think VR will be considered a subset of AR over time. But for AR, really, we have an absence of use case. Because even if I can give you a technology pack that you could put on your headset today, right now, and you'd wear around and you'd be comfortable doing in a social setting, what would you truly use it for? But what we were coming up with, and I realized was the power of Red 6, was we identified a use case that only augmented reality could solve. So we got to work, and that thing you saw me wheeling out, we finished it. It became this thing over 18 months, and there's a smattering of people in the audience that have flown the airplane. Seb's trying desperately to come fly. We just denied you, didn't we? It's another. We got you in November. Yeah, I know. But this became a mobile flying augmented reality laboratory. And so Glenn Snyder and I literally built the company. I mean, we had a couple of co-founders in the early days, but Glenn and I, the only ones survived. We built this from the ground up. We were flying 8 times a day, 27 times a week was my record with Glenn in the back. The amount of vomit in the back of this airplane is untrue. If you think as coders you've got issues in your work environment, go speak to Glenn Snyder and tell me if you've got anything to complain about. He would sit in the back of this as I was going upside down, pulling G-force, coding away, throwing up, and then code, because we had demos to provide for the Air Force. And now we get to Red 6. So the Air Force, I called them up, I'm like, I'm about to make all of your dreams come true. I said, go on. I said, well, you know that within visual range piece, what if I could put real airplanes up in the sky and allow you to train within visual range, which would connect the dots for LVC, therefore ushering in an entirely new paradigm. They said, guys, we've been looking for this for 5 years. Is it true? And like any good entrepreneur with a PowerPoint, I said, absolutely, 100%, I got you. They're like, okay, well, we'll go prove it. We got 12 months, I think. So we had a demo in February of 2019. And the first demo did not look like this at all. So take heart. The first demo was initially on the ground in that airplane that wasn't quite finished yet, and I had to borrow an engine and a propeller from another friend of mine to make it look like an airplane. And it was on the ground, but we approached AR and the system, ATARS, the Advanced Tactical Augmented Reality System, in a fundamentally different way. We created an architecture we thought would make it work outdoors and in the most dynamic environments of all. And so the Air Force gave us a series of challenges. The first flight test challenge was in November of 2019. And their challenge to us was, guys, these claims you're making of putting virtual entities up into the sky and having them fly around, they're big claims. We don't quite believe you can do it. So let's start by fixing an object in space. So it looks and feels and acts like a three-dimensional object. So we became known for this three-dimensional floating cube that sits in the skies of Southern California. And it has framed sides. There's no sides to it, it's just a frame. And it's framed very deliberately because when you go up to see this thing and it's anchored in space and geolocated correctly, because it has framed sides and no framed edges and no sides, you can fly through it. And when you fly through it, it demonstrates the immersive aspect of augmented reality. And I come back to a solution. It is a use case and a solution that augmented reality is so compelling for. And so when the Air Force came to fly us, this tech demo was our criteria for success. They would hit the I believe button. But we like to culturally under-promise and over-deliver. So when they arrived, we took them to the cube, we flew them through the cube, we went upside down, 3 dimensions, it worked beautifully. We then came off the cube, and we said, okay, check this out. And we hit the button, and in the distance was a virtual KC-46 tanker aircraft that was flying in orbit around the skies of Southern California. So we see that what we're talking about, we're in a real airplane looking out, we see everything around us, and there's a virtual reality tanker orbiting. And we flew an intercept on this tanker, we were able to join on the wing, look out, that's a big old airplane right there, lift the visor up, yeah, there's nothing there, yeah, there's a tanker there, move in behind it, and the tracking solution that we have is sub 2 centimeters, it is so accurate that we can actually do air-to-air refueling practice and training. And once I did that, I realized we'd ushered in something incredibly, incredibly important for the future of the Department of Defense and beyond. And we'll talk about a couple of the use cases. So we went through the evolution of that over the last 4 years. We've been working with the Department of Defense, the OEMs, Boeing, Lockheed, Leonardo, BAE Systems, all of which we've just announced a big deal with Boeing. And this technology is going to the next generation fighter airplane, the T-7 and F-15. Because ultimately, we developed ATARs to the point now where it is so compelling. And these guys, and if you raise your hands, fellas, in the front, if you want to talk any tech stuff and coding and how challenging it is, these guys are a small part of a team. My dog understands more about coding than I do, but these guys are amazing. We have a team of about 83 people now in Red 6, and we're growing again. So the company is growing very quickly. But we've taken ATARs now and taken it from this prototype that Glenn and I built into a product where you can go up into an airplane, into the sky, drop down into a virtual world, and you can train against whatever you want to train against. You can train against multiple airplanes. And these airplanes are controlled by artificial intelligence. And I'm going to show you a video at the end. I'll keep you hanging on for the video, but I'm going to show you a video at the end, and it is unrendered. It's undoctored. It's not messed with. It's completely raw footage. So much so that we actually stick an iPhone up inside the visor of one of the pilots, and we make them fly with one eye. It's completely raw footage because I'm really sensitive to putting rendered stuff out there that's not real, right? That we see before. So you're going to see some real stuff. But these things are controlled by AI algorithms. The next logical step then was to connect multiple airplanes into space, which we've done. And that system is called Carbon, the Combined Augmented Reality Battle Space. And with Carbon now, you can go up in multiple airplanes, enter a game space, and fly a real-world mission against multiple entities. And you're both seeing the same thing, adjusted obviously for parallax, 1 and 2 player in the cockpit, and your relative position in the airspace if you're in a different airplane. Well, what is that? I'm not a coder, but as far as I can tell, that's the world's first multiplayer video game where we play outdoors, up in the sky in dynamic environments. And when we talk, we get really excited about that because my take is that's where gaming's heading, right? I think when I was a kid, I'd play in the mud with a stick. Kids now, they're sedentary inside playing video games. I think the next great leap that we make is blending the outdoor world with the synthetic world, and that's where gaming's going. That's what I'm betting on, and I think, we're aligned on that set, right? Please nod. Okay, good. Otherwise, I'd look like an idiot. So let's talk about the metaverse and why I think this is important, because obviously it's a much coined, jumped upon, bandwagon kind of phrase, but I'm deadly serious about this. Why is metaverse important? So read Matthew Ball's book. It's awesome. Matthew obviously does the Lord's work in terms of defining the metaverse. But if I ask all of us, we'll probably have 100 different answers in this room, right? So let me anchor us around 3 common things that I think about in terms of what makes a metaverse a metaverse. Firstly, it has to be continuous with real life and persistent, right? It has to exist whether you're inside of it or not. It has to be synchronous with real life, so you can step inside of it and come back out of it, and it makes sense to us. You with me so far? We all agree on that loosely? Okay, good. The third one is, and I think this is critically important, if it's a metaverse, then decisions you take inside the metaverse must impact both your digital self and your real self. If it doesn't, in my mind, it's just a video game. So if we accept that and we start thinking about, well, what is he talking about? Why does this apply to the military? Well, when we go fly missions, we go fly a mission, we'll go night one and we'll exert effect, whatever it is. We're dropping stuff, we're doing electronic jamming, we're waging war across the whole electromagnetic spectrum. When we land, there's an outcome from that mission. And day two, the next wave go, but they inherit the outcome of that mission, right? And so on and so forth. Over a course of a campaign, multiple weeks, it's an evolving picture constantly, but it's a living, breathing world. When we train, we can't do that. So the way we train, we go up, we fly a mission, we mess it up, we come down, we debrief it, like, okay, that sucked, let's go again tomorrow, different mission, and we go again. Well, with a metaverse, based on Carbon, what we've built now, where we have the ability to put a living, breathing world up there, connect multiple players into it. If I can create environments, I don't want to say World of Warcraft or wherever it is outdoors, but I can have that world controlled by AI as well that can adapt to the outcomes of our missions, then now we start to usher in a fundamentally new value proposition, which is campaign-level training. So this is something that we're working on for aerospace and defense that I think is incredibly important. There are some other benefits to doing cool stuff with tech as well and being based in Santa Monica. So one day, we're sitting there working on the airplanes and we get a knock at the hangar door and in walks Iron Man. No kidding, in walked Iron Man, like Robert Downey Jr. He's like, oh, hey, you know I live next door, in the hangar next door? I'm like, no. He's like, well, I saw you guys flying around in this stuff, and this stuff looks a lot like some of the stuff from one of my movies. I'm like, So we started talking, and Robert became really engaged, and we started thinking about digital content and the Marvel universe and Iron Man and all that, what that meant. Like, I remember like F-22s flying around in Iron Man, et cetera, et cetera. So Robert became actively interested in us and started to connect us with a bunch of folks. And one of the reasons that Iron Man became very interested in us is he sees Red 6 as green tech. Right? It's kind of an unusual thing to think about in terms of the context of what I've talked about. But in essence, we have the optionality now to put 50% less airplanes up in the sky if we're not having to provide the quote-unquote adversaries to train against. Well, what does that mean at scale in terms of carbon offsets, real figures? We think at scale it means we save 8.5 million pounds of CO2 into the atmosphere every single year. What does that mean? It means about 720,000 annual US households in terms of carbon offset from this technology. So really unusual. Yeah, more than one clap for that. Come on. You go to the top of the class. Thank you. I appreciate it. Now, it's really meaningful work for us, right? And Robert started a fund that has that thesis now around green tech. And so he became involved in the company. And from that, we started to get connected into Disney. And this is where it now gets really fun. So we've gone from this DoD company where we've created this world's first outdoor metaverse up in the sky now to working with Iron Man on green tech. And then Disney come knocking at our door and they're like, hey, we heard you've built a metaverse outdoors. And if you listen to Disney and Bob Chapek, they're all bullish on the metaverse. And the challenge Disney have is they've got the theme parks and the physical rides inside the theme parks, and they have a whole bunch of digital content. Well, two things, it's really expensive to modernize theme park rides, billions of dollars to do that. And how do you make them relevant? And secondly, how do you capitalize on the sheer amount of digital content, like not least Star Wars and Marvel and all of this kind of stuff? The answer is for them, metaverse. The problem is they didn't have a means of accessing the metaverse inside the theme parks. Why is that? Because so far there's no technology or augmented reality technology that works outdoors or in dynamic environments. Well, guess what we built? Iron Man lived next door to us. This makes a ton of sense. So Disney came knocking. And now I'm going full circle back to my childhood, and I'm going to geek out on this because this stuff's really cool. Disney came, and they wanted a flight demo. So we took them up on a flight demo. But when we took Disney up to go do air-to-air combat, we weren't training against peer adversaries. When we took Disney up, we flew through the cube. As we flew through the cube, the Star Wars music played. As we flew out of the cube, they entered a Star Wars world up in the sky. And what do I mean by that? Two suns floating around in the sky. These guys did it. It's amazing. Two suns, a massive Death Star. No way. Two Star Destroyers overhead. I mean like life size. The Star Destroyer size, massive, right? You look to your right, my wingman's not an F-22, it's an X-Wing fighter with Luke Skywalker on your wing. Yeah, right? It's an X-Wing fighter, and the wings open up, and I go, he's there. And then I go to take gas, but it's not a tanker, it's the Millennium Falcon. And then you hear Chewbacca on the radio, right? And like this full immersive experience. So the Millennium Falcon's then, he peels off, and then in the distance, what's this coming towards us? A bunch of TIE fighters. TIE fighters controlled by AI algorithms that are acting like combat airplanes. And they're shooting lasers at us now. And I hit the button, and guess what? Guess what comes off my wing? Lasers. So I'm like finally living my Luke Skywalker dream. So we took Disney up into this, and they were just blown away by what they saw. And so we are coming to the end of the Disney Accelerator program, but keep watching this space with Disney, because last week we strapped our system to I'm allowed to say this? I'm going to do it anyway and get in trouble. A theme park ride inside of Disney. So here's where we're going with this, as I see this, right? It is, what is the metaverse and what have we done? Well, we enable something really cool, which I think is the digital customization of a shared physical experience. So I like Iron Man, I love Star Wars, right? Jeremy here likes Iron Man. We go on the same theme park ride, but we're getting fundamentally different experiences. And I won't tell you what it is we've done right now for the demo, because I will get in trouble for that, but suffice to say that we've blended that digital world with a theme park ride. What's a theme park ride? It's basically an airplane doing dogfighting, right? Going upside down and pulling G's. So some really, really interesting use cases with Disney that we're very, very proud of. Sorry, got ahead of myself. I'm going to finish by showing you a video of what it is we've done. I'm going to stress again, this is completely real footage. It's not edited, it's not doctored. I'm really sensitive to companies putting out stuff out there that doesn't exist in the real world. I will tell you the experience in the real world is even better than this. This is raw as it absolutely gets. I will also say thank you very much for listening to my story, the journey of Red 6, and I think after this, if we've got time, we'll take some questions, but let's take a look at this. What's that? And it's all done in Unreal. He's he's like this in the front row. It's Unreal, Tommy. All right, here we go. Thank you, guys. Guys, thank you so much for listening to my story. It's been a hell of a journey. Hopefully, I know it was a winding road to get to, but it's important for context in terms of what we've built and how my life connected to standing here in front of you today. I'm hugely privileged to talk to you. Thank you so much for everything. Again, a big thank you to these guys in the front row, because I get to tell the story. They do all the work. So please, another round of applause for these guys. It's amazing.